May the meditations of my heart and my mind be acceptable to you, gracious and loving God. Allow me to be an instrument of your will, your peace, and your love. Amen. Our first reading is from the book of Genesis. I'm sort of following along the book of Genesis for a while. And it continues the story of Jacob. Jacob is fleeing Esau's justified anger and vengeance because Jacob stole the blessing intended for his brother Esau. First, Jacob manipulates Esau to get his birthright, then he steals, literally I think, steals his father's blessing intended for Esau. Don't forget, this is all worked out by God. Jacob is on the run, fearing that his brother will do him harm. In this reading, it describes the first great critical experience in the religious life of Jacob. Jacob possibly is the most interesting patriarch, even though he is not the most honorable. Here, for the first time, he comes in direct contact with God, meeting God in a dream. That was really unexpected. As special revelations have been made to his grandfather Abraham and to his father Isaac, he now learns for himself directly from the mouth of Jehovah that he too is to be next in the direct line of the promise. At this very moment to which he leaves the land promised to him, to his posterity, he is assured of his return and under divine protection, and a fulfillment of God's will through him. The transfer of the birthright from Esau to Jacob, which has been validated by Isaac, his father, is now being validated in heaven. God himself is giving assurance to Jacob that henceforth he is to be the recognized vehicle of the promises. This shows me, I think it shows all of us, no matter what mistakes we've made, when God calls and comes looking for us, no matter where God calls us, in spite of ourselves, no matter where we are on life's journey. The ladder, not with rungs, but more like a staircase, was a hint that the promises would culminate in something that would bridge heaven and earth. In the Gospel of John, right in the first chapter, verse 51, Jesus infers that he is that ladder. What we heard today was the parable of the wheat and the tares, and it's the third parable contained in chapter 13 of Matthew, and describes an aspect of the kingdom of heaven. Again, as last week, the disciples asked Jesus to explain the parable to them. Contemporary English language Bibles, cleverly translate the tares, the parable of the wheat and tares, with nouns that are nearly identical, wheat and weeds. It's easy to think of ourselves as the wheat and all the other people in the world as weeds. Sort of us and them. We think this way not only when thinking of individuals, but also when it comes to religious communities and denominations. And this practice only leads to division. Even in communities that affirm the radical otherness of God, that claim that God is above and beyond all human distinctions, color, sexual orientation, race, gender, age, dress, and so on and so on. Even those communities assume, and they assume wrongly, that God is with them. That if we are divided, us and them, God is with me. All we have to do is look at the Civil War. All we have to do is look at what's happening today. Look at the sports today. Look at the Mideast today. Look at what is happening here at home regarding simple things like masks, us and them. weeds and wheat. Christian theology reminds us that in each of us, this is the thing to remember, it's not us and them. Christian theology reminds us that within each one of us there is wheat and there are also weeds. In Martin Luther's language, we are both saint and sinner. Perhaps it's the weedy part of each of us that we talk about. It's talked about as the weeds. Maybe it's why we come to church, one of the reasons. Once again, this Sunday's reading gives us the image of the seed and the harvest. It explains the allegory. In explaining the allegory, Matthew writes that the furnace of fire, which will be where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Scholars suggest that this image of eternal separation from God as fire. It recalls the perpetually burning refuse dump outside the city walls. Outside the city walls years ago, thousands of years ago, that burnt pretty much on a regular basis. The people have gnashing their teeth, the gnashing of teeth. So that means they have bodies. That means that they might not be burned. It's that separation from God. All of this, we need to remember that God is the God of all, us and them, the weeds and the wheat, regardless of race, color, sexual identity, national origin, or religions, or any other element of personhood. Over the years, Christians and other religions have used their religion as a weapon against others, the weeds. Just putting this in, God doesn't really want that. History reminds us that others have experienced events similar to us, and worse that we are experiencing at the present time. Present time with COVID and the economic issues. And they have persevered and overcome them. However, this does not alleviate the suffering that we as individuals and as a society are experiencing. The economic downturn that we are going through, as well as the COVID-19, is plaguing societies and nations throughout the world. They have left and have left individuals and families, Christians and otherwise, struggling to live and to hold on to hope. All of this resulted in high levels of anxiety and stress and suffering for individuals, for family groups, communities, and the larger world community. Christians caught in these situations are in need of and desire hope, just as every other person in the world. There are some that have the feeling that God has left them. Others feel that they must have sinned in some way that brought this trouble upon them. They may think that they deserve God's absence as punishment for their wrongs. There are those that believe that this is the beginning of the end times. There is an overarching need in all Christians to experience the loving grace of God in all their encounters in life. In the midst of the pain and suffering, we need to be reassured or assured of God's presence that both offer hope and the strength to persevere. The gospel message of God's enduring presence, enabling power through Christ and the Holy Spirit is a source of this great hope. It's not always easy. Not always easy for people to hear the witness when they are suffering. Jacob's dream sequence offers reassurance that even with a traitorous past and on the run from home and from well-deserved retribution, he was still worthy of God's consideration. We are all worthy of God's consideration. The good news of God's enabling preference does not deny the reality that there is trouble in the world, that there are health issues, life and death issues, that there are problems economically, but it does offer Christians the reassurance that we have an advocate, Jesus Christ, who will stand beside us in the midst of trouble. Confidence in God's perseverance as a source of hope, regardless of the circumstance of our life. To be on the journey with us, no matter where we are on our own journey. Paul's message in the Romans offered the Roman church assurance that their troubles were not sufficient for them to lose confidence in God's presence. Their suffering might continue, but God would give them the strength to persevere and would keep hope alive within them. I think when we pray, this is not here, I think when we pray, I have a friend of mine that this afternoon I'll go to her memorial service, 60 years old, and I'm sure she prayed that her cancer would be cured, like many of us pray that way. It doesn't always mean that God's going to fix things. But he is always with us. He's always with us on that journey. As we step through life, we are not alone. The good news of God's enabling presence does not deny the reality that there's trouble in the world. But it does offer Christians the reassurance that through Christ, we have an advocate that will stand beside us in all forms of trouble, in the midst of trouble. Confidence in God's presence is the source of hope, regardless of the circumstances of our life and the circumstances that are happening. It is a message that has traveled through the years, the ages, to individuals and communities beleaguered by acts of violence, pain, plagues, and suffering to the body and to the spirit. It is a message that has traveled to our time. It's a message that is meant for us today, for you and me, that as we go through the present challenge, maybe a plural, challenges, there is an advocate in spite of us that is beside us on this journey.